Welcome to my channel, End Times Bible Study. My name is Diane, and our topic today will mainly focus on the false prophet and the mark of the beast in part 2 of our study on Revelation 13. So last week we looked at the beast empire and the beast himself, aka the Antichrist. So if you missed that video, it's in my Revelation playlist, which is linked in the description box. So today we're going to read through Revelation 13 and providing commentary as we go, with an emphasis on 5 main themes we see in this chapter. Number 1, the mortal head wound of the beast. What does that mean? Number 2, the false prophet in the unholy trinity of Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. Number 3, the false signs and miracles and wonders that are performed by the false prophet. Number 4, the image of the beast which can speak. And number 5, the mark of the beast and its number, 666. So let's start by reading Revelation 13. So if you have a Bible, you might want to pull it out and follow along. I like to make notes in my Bible as I'm going through and cross references and all that. So that's very helpful. And we do follow, we try to take things in context. That's crucial for understanding what the Bible is talking about, plus scripture interpreting scripture. So we will be doing some other cross-referencing with other passages in the Bible today. So, all right. So the beast from the sea, verse 1. Then I saw a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads rising out of the sea. There were 10 royal crowns on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. The beast I saw was like a leopard with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. So in part 1, we really focused in on really mainly these 2 chapters. These 2 verses. So I'm just going to give you just a brief, a brief description. So, all right. So the beast is coming out of the sea, which the sea, the word is not oceans. It is sea. And that would be the Mediterranean Sea would be the context. And that's actually correlating with Daniel 7, where Daniel sees 4 beasts coming out of the great sea. So that would be referencing the Mediterranean Sea. So we're expecting this Antichrist and his empire to be coming up from that Middle Eastern region based on what the Bible is teaching. So the beast has 10 horns, and the beast here is representing not only the Antichrist empire, but then the Antichrist, every empire has a ruler. So, so it's kind of the Antichrist, the Antichrist empire, which is the final empire that will exist on earth prior to the return of Jesus Christ at the end of the 7-year tribulation. So the beast has 10 horns, and the 10 horns are defined for us in Daniel 7, actually, that they are 10 kings, and Revelation 17 as well. So we correlated all this last time. So you have 10 kings, and we see that they have royal crowns on the horns. So these are royal kings, rulers of 10 kingdoms. And the 7 heads, again, when you look at Revelation 17, it talks about the 7 heads are 7 mountains, i.e. kingdoms, and there are 7 kings associated with these kingdoms. And the Antichrist is an 8th kingdom who comes up from among the other 7. Or he's really, he's belongs to the other 7, I think is the wording. So the 7 world empires that have existed, because I want you to recall, the Bible is Israel-centric, okay? That's what the theme is the nation of Israel and how world events have affected Israel. So they were initially, before they became a nation, they were enslaved in Egypt. And then, Moses led them out. So the first empire that oppressed the Jews as a whole would be Egypt, followed by Assyria, who was then conquered by Babylon, who was then conquered by Medo-Persia, who was then conquered by Greece. Greece was conquered by Rome, and then Rome was conquered by the Ottoman or Turkish Empire, which ruled for quite a long time They only saw their demise at the end of World War I because they had sided with Germany, and so then they fell out of power at that point. And they had an Islamic caliphate where you have this caliph who's ruling over this religious figure. I guess maybe an analogy could kind of be similar to the Pope, perhaps, although I think the caliph might have more power. I don't know. But nevertheless, that's 7 kingdoms. So we see from Daniel chapters 2 and 7, there's a revised kingdom at the end tied to one of these empires, which seems to me to be correlating with the final Islamic caliphate. So, I go into that in more detail in the previous videos. I'm not going to go back into all that, but the beast also the beast has blasphemous names on its head. So each head representing a kingdom. These were all basically Antichrist Gentile nations that were opposed to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They were steeped in idolatry, worshiping false gods. So now he says, the beast I saw, so this empire is like a leopard with the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And those are the 3 animals for the first 3 kingdoms Daniel sees in Daniel chapter 7, rising out of the great sea. And the leopard correlates with Greece, the bear correlates with Medo-Persia, and the mouth of a lion, or the lion, correlates with Babylon. So if you're looking for an empire to be coming from the Mediterranean region, if you combined all those empires together, those 3 empires, like their landmass, then that would be what you're expecting for this final world empire, which is then a Middle Eastern empire that makes perfect sense when, Israel is a tiny sliver of land surrounded by largely hostile Muslim countries. So, all right. So then we see that the dragon gave the beast. So the dragon is identified in Revelation 12 as Satan. So you can go back and look. Revelation 12:9, I think, is the reference. But the dragon gives the Antichrist his power and his throne and his great authority. And the throne of the Antichrist is actually the throne of Satan is actually described in Revelation chapter 13. So 2:13. I'm not sure what I said. And so the John the disciple is writing the book of Revelation, and there's 7 letters to 7 churches. And so the church of Pergamum is described as being the location of Satan's throne. Okay, so that would be, the ruins, so they had the 7 churches all existed at 95 AD when John was writing this. Some of the areas are kind of in ruins today. Others, I think there's a little bit of a town going, but you can go visit them. They're all found in modern day Turkey. So now whether Satan's throne is still located there, I don't know, because that's, a couple thousand years ago, give or take. But nevertheless, Satan has a throne on the earth, and wherever it is at this point in time, he is giving his throne, his power, and great authority to the Antichrist. So we see that this final world ruler is supernaturally empowered, demonically. It's a demonic power that's behind his rule. All right. So now we see that verse 3. One of the heads of the beast appeared to have been mortally wounded, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole world marveled and followed the beast. They worshiped the dragon who had given authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can wage war against it?" So when it talks about one of the heads of the beast, again, the heads seem to be representing world empires. So is this basically the 7th head of the beast, that, the fact that it's gone and now it's coming back with an Islamic caliphate, because they haven't had their Islamic caliphate. That was done away with at the end of World War I, and they have not had a caliph ruling since that time. So a lot of the Muslims, especially some of these hardline, more Muslim terrorist groups, they are trying to reestablish the caliphate. So, is this going to be something, because this seems to be happening midpoint of the tribulation would be the time period where the Antichrist is really consolidating his power at this point. He kicks off the tribulation by confirming the covenant with the many. That's Daniel 9:27 and also Revelation 6:1-2. That we see the Antichrist rise, and that starts the tribulation. So he's obviously on the scene, but I think it's really at the midpoint where he consolidates and really gains that authority, because we'll see this in a minute, that the beast is given authority to act for 42 months. So that would be the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. But at any event, if you get this Islamic caliphate reestablished, you have the Antichrist killing the 2 witnesses at the midpoint. He's entering the Jewish temple and desecrating it and declaring himself to be God. That's 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And he breaks the treaty he's made and stops the temple sacrifice. So Jerusalem is conquered at the midpoint and then trodden down for the final 3.5 years. And we see that even Luke, there's several references. I think I'm kind of getting ahead of myself on these notes, but in Revelation 11, it talks about John he's told to go measure the temple. So clearly a rebuilt Jewish temple. But he says in verse 2, but exclude the courtyard outside the temple. Do not measure it, because it's been given over to the nations, i.e. the Gentiles, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So that's the final 3.5 years. So, is this going to be like, wow, look what this Antichrist leader has accomplished for us. He's done what we've been trying to do for a long time, is to retake Jerusalem, because under the Ottoman Empire, they controlled Jerusalem and that area by and large. So, all right. So we do see that it talks about the head of the, there's this mortal wound. So is it also, so the beast empire, is it that coming back that causes all of this worship, the dragons, they're worshiping Satan, and then they're also worshiping the Antichrist, as saying who is like the beast and who can wage war against it. So it's going to be like, wow, we're invincible, basically, is how they're going to be feeling. But they do mention in this chapter, there's 3 times it talks about this wound, and we see it again in verse 12 and verse 14. So we'll pick that up a little bit more as we go. All right, then verse 5, the beast was given a mouth to speak arrogant and blasphemous words and authority to act for 42 months. So again, now this seems to be talking more about the Antichrist himself versus the empire. And we see a correlation in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, where it talks about the arrogant words that the little horn is speaking. So the Antichrist, as we talked about last time, has different names throughout the Bible. In Daniel 7, he's described as the little horn. And in Revelation, he's referred to as the beast. But we're talking about the same person. But again, you can see by the blasphemous words, the Antichrist nature against Christ. I mean, this is going to be blaspheming God. And then the authority to act for 42 months. So that's the final 3.5 years where he will be in power. And that also is confirmed in Daniel 7:25, where it talks about the saints are given into the hand of the horn, the little horn, for a time, times, and half a time. So again, this is all correlating to 3.5 years, which is the final half of the 7-year tribulation. And they are using a lunar calendar, by the way. So it's a little bit different than our 365-day calendar. So, all right, now verse 6, and the beast opened its mouth to speak blasphemies against God and to slander his name and his tabernacle, those who dwell in heaven. So again, more blasphemy and slander. This is a theme here is emerging. Okay. Verse 7, the beast was permitted to wage war against the saints and conquer them. So again, that's correlating with Daniel, the final 3.5 years, the saints are given into the hand of the Antichrist. And it was given authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was slain. So the Lamb who was slain is clearly a reference to Jesus Christ. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. incidentally, if you're having the final 3.5 years of the tribulation, the mark of the beast is, being rolled out around this point, and, horrendous persecution is now breaking out against like the Jews and anybody and Jewish believers, any Christian who's there at this point. They are given over into the hands of the Antichrist for this final 3.5 years. So to me, this completely refutes a mid-trib rapture, because the first half, I'm a pre-trib rapture person. And here's one of the reasons why. I mean, I think the church is taken out at the beginning before all of this starts. Then the 7-year tribulation begins, with the entrance of the Antichrist on the scene, making this covenant, the 7-year treaty. And then we don't see the church mentioned again in Revelation. Like we see there's the 7 letters to the 7 churches, which I think are really applicable. They were real churches that existed, but the messages and the contents are applicable to all churches, all true believers throughout the ages. But then after that, we don't see the church mentioned. What we see is the focus on Israel and Jews. Okay. And that's who the 7-year tribulation is prophesied for. That's Daniel 9:24-27 clearly states that. I think it's 9:24, that this is for, it was to Daniel, to your people who are the Jews and your holy city, which is Jerusalem. That's who this period of time is prophesied for. So then we see the church show up in Revelation 19, and they're already in heaven at that point as the bride, preparing to return to earth with Jesus Christ at his second coming. So that appears that that's where they've been the whole time. So God removes the believers out of the earth. The tribulation starts. Now we have 144,000 Jewish witnesses, or Jewish men who were sealed, 12,000 from each tribe. They have the seal of God on their forehead, and presumably they are going forth throughout the world bringing a testimony that Jesus is the Messiah. So they're Jews who are believers in Jesus Christ, the true Messiah. We also have the 2 witnesses who have their ministry in Jerusalem for the first 3.5 years, also testifying about Jesus Christ. So there will be a huge harvest of souls. Many people are going to come to salvation in Jesus Christ during this initial, really mainly I think during the first 3.5 years, because what is going to happen at the midpoint when the mark of the beast is rolled out, it's kind of like crunch time. Either you are going to take the mark of the beast and pledge allegiance to the Antichrist and his kingdom and worship the Antichrist, and the mark signifies you belong to the Antichrist, and that is eternal damnation in the lake of fire. And we're going to look at some verses that confirm that. But, I just lost my train of thought. So, anyways, I'll probably get back to it as we're going through this, because I think I kind of got way off my notes from what I had written down. But, I do want to make the point of giving authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. I mean, people, are a lot of people, and I was taught this too, the final kingdom is the Roman Empire, but really I don't think so. And went into that in more detail in the last video, but, the Roman Empire doesn't really have a plan to establish world dominance or, any of the Western European nations. But the Islam, their goal is complete world domination of Islam. All right. And they are actively working for that. And they have imported, through all this unbridled immigration, so many Muslims throughout the world. And they are currently working for this. And I shared this quote last week. It's like one of the main leaders of Iran. I forget his exact title, but it's like Ali Khamenei, I think is his name. And if you go on my Telegram channel, which is linked in the description box, I pinned the comment, which has his speech. He gave the speech like last week and talked about the goals of, for Iran, like the goals of the Islamic, the Shiite Muslims is destroy the West, which would be us, myself, eliminate Israel, and have a global revolution, which, as he said, will occur shortly. So they're planning for this. And I personally think probably won't happen until during the tribulation and maybe at the midpoint. There might be when Jerusalem gets invaded at the midpoint, all of a sudden it's like kind of day X, and the worldwide infrastructure they have put in place of jihadists will all arise on that day, and it'll be like, submit to Allah or die. And so it breaks out worldwide. And of course, the mark of the beast will be instituted. So, and this was rather chilling. This was on Telegram yesterday, and actually was on End Times Headlines, published this article. It says, Muslim man says he is buying churches all over Florida and converting them into mosques. Quote, we convert 3 churches into mosques and we looking for more. One day Florida will become Muslim. May Allah give victory to Islam in this country. Now, you should find that rather chilling. So that's what's going on, and that's just one small example out of many. But I think that's how things could play out. And then let's move on to verse 9. He who has an ear, let him hear. And that's how each of the 7 letters of the 7 churches ended. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And those letters were all dictated directly by Jesus Christ, to John, who wrote the letters down. But now he says, if anyone is destined for captivity, into captivity he will go. If anyone is to die by the sword he must be killed. Here is a call for the perseverance and faith of the saints. Because, you're given over into the hand of the Antichrist at this point. And, these are the things that are going to be happening during this time period. Now, when it talks about captivity, you think of just this whole Hamas invasion of Israel, which occurred October 7th of 2023. And they took like hundreds of people hostage. It took them out of Israel into Gaza. There's still hostages there. It's like a year and a half later. They've released some in drips and drabs. A lot of them have, were killed. Some are probably the remaining ones. They think that only 23 or 24 are still alive even. They're not treated well. So this is what's going to be happening is Jews are going to be taken into captivity. They're going to be taken out of Israel. And there's going to be people killed with the sword. Now, I want to cross-reference with a couple other verses. So we're going to look at Luke 21, 20. So there's 3 parallel accounts that Jesus gave of the end times teachings. It's Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And if you read all 3, and I've done some videos where I've done comparison and contrast, but if you read all 3 of them in context, they are all clearly talking about the same event. They're using the same language, but Luke gives us some additional information here that's not found in Matthew and Mark, which they focus on the midpoint of the tribulation. When you see the abomination that causes desolation, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. And that's also corresponding with the Jews fleeing in Revelation chapter 12. Again, it says they flee and they are to their place in the wilderness, and where they will be nourished or taken care of, fed, everything for a time, times and half a time. So those who actually get out and flee, they will be cared for the final 3.5 years. Let's see. And so now Luke is telling us, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that her desolation is near. Because the Antichrist isn't just going to waltz in by himself and go desecrate the temple. He's going to need armies backing him up for him to go in and do this. So verse 21, see how this is the same thing that Luke is telling them that Matthew and Mark also said. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country stay out of the city. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. How miserable those days will be for pregnant and nursing mothers. Same language as Matthew and Mark. For there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. So there it is, the sword and captivity. And Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This is exactly what John was saying in Revelation 11. So Jerusalem's trodden down. It's occupied by, from other, it seems to be the Antichrist and his forces. The Muslims are occupying Jerusalem, and the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled when Jesus physically returns at the end of the 7-year tribulation, where he will destroy all of these who have come against Israel. And then the next thing he talks about is, him returning. There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth dismay. So again, context is everything. This is, I know there is false teaching that, this was referring to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And even the little heading up here, the destruction of Jerusalem, I feel is deceptive, because I don't think Jerusalem is destroyed. It's invaded, it's conquered and taken over, but it's not destroyed at that time. So I think people are missing it on that. And then also when you correlate with Zechariah 14, 1-2, and this is Israel being addressed here. Behold, a day of the Lord is coming when your plunder will be divided in your presence. Okay, Israel's getting invaded and all their stuff's, their plunder is taken while they're, watching. For I will gather all the nations for battle against Jerusalem, and the city will be captured. Okay, the city's captured, the houses are looted, and the women ravished. So that's horrendous. Half of the city will go into exile. So again, people being taken out of Jerusalem into captivity, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. So, then it goes on to talk about them fleeing, which I think again is correlating with the midpoint when those who are able to get out. Then it talks about, then my Lord will come with all his holy ones at the end of verse 5. And then it talks about the return of Jesus Christ. It talks about Armageddon, and then it talks about the millennium starting. So there's a clear progression of events here that's given that is all correlating with that. All right, so let's see here. Oh, also Daniel 11. Okay, so Daniel 11. Okay. This is interesting too, because the king of the north is a reference to the Antichrist. And we see in Daniel 11, Antiochus Epiphanes is an Antichrist prototype. And twice in Daniel, in chapter 8 and 11, we see where the prophecy seems to be talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and then it just morphs right into talking about this final end times ruler that we call the Antichrist. But here he's called the king of the north. And it talks about and this is in Antiochus. A lot of the prophecy actually was fulfilled by Antiochus, but the very end of it is not. But some think that the entire prophecy really is applying to the Antichrist. Like, even though there was a partial fulfillment, the entire thing will be fulfilled by the Antichrist, which I think is very possible. So it talks about the king of the north. His forces will rise up and desecrate the temple fortress. They will abolish the daily sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation. So again, the temple's desecrated. With flattery, he, the king of the north, will corrupt those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God will firmly resist him. So this is the key right here. Those who know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, or even if you're just a Jewish person that is trying to follow, the God of, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like they've just missed their Messiah, but they are worshiping, that true God there. So like, even if they could recognize this is wrong. It says, those with insight will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by sword or flame or be captured or plundered. So again, that's all tying in exactly with what these passages are talking about. All right, so now let's see. We're going to talk next about, getting into more of the false prophet. So let me try to beat that up some. All right, so we have this unholy trinity, and Satan tries to copy God. He wants to be God. And a lot of the stuff he does is kind of an inversion of, the true God. And it's weird how there's like this satanic trinity that we see, because we have Satan as, God the Father. It sounds awful to say that, but, in an inversion, the Antichrist is like trying to be God the Son, and then the false prophet is like trying to be God the Holy Spirit. Now, if we look in Revelation 16:13, this is under the bowls of wrath. In verse 13, and I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs coming out of the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. These are demonic spirits that perform signs and go out to all the kings of the earth. So it's assembling them for Armageddon. So the point I'm trying to make with this particular verse, though, is we see the dragon, which we know is Satan, the beast, which we know is the Antichrist, the ruler of this final beast empire, and the false prophet. This is where he's first called the false prophet, but this is clearly referring to this other character that we're going to be looking at here in a second. So this is like their unholy trinity. And the word false prophet is used also in Revelation 19, verse 20, when it talks about that the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire at the return of Jesus Christ. And then in Revelation 20, verse 10, the same words are used again, just this time referencing the fact that they have been in the lake of fire for 1,000 years, and now Satan is joining them at that point. So, back to Revelation 13. So then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. This beast had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. So there's, the first beast is the beast out of the sea, and now we have the beast out of the earth. So it's a little unclear. There's a lot of different opinions on what that really means. Some people think that the earth might be representing Israel, and therefore the false prophet might be Jewish. I mean, I guess we'll see. I personally don't think that's too likely, but who knows? And in Revelation 10, verses 5 through 6, John has an encounter with this mighty angel. And it says that the angel was standing on the sea. He has 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. And he lifted up his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and everything in it, and earth and everything in it, and the sea and everything in it. So, it could, in a sense, almost be just referencing like, the worldwide authority. We've got the sea, and, like kind of like everything is under the control of the Antichrist and the false prophet during this final 3.5 years. They're given this authority. And it even states that this beast exercised all the authority of the first beast. Now remember, the first beast was given, let's see, where was that verse? Oh yeah, the dragon gave the beast his power, his throne, and his great authority. So clearly, the false prophet he's also given, he has he exercised all the authority of the first beast. So they're both like satanically, demonically inspired, and given power to do all of this stuff. So the false prophet is forcing, he's the one enforcing like this worship. Now, I want to talk about just the 2 horns like a lamb. And, I've used some different AI things. And honestly, I'm like, they're supposed to be so smart, but I keep giving them detailed descriptions of what I want. And it seems impossible for any of them. Either they refuse to do it, which has happened, or when they do it, it's not what I've asked for. So, because I asked for a lamb with horn nubs, because lambs don't really have horns. All right. But so disregard the horns on this one, because horns shouldn't be there. And I keep re-asking, and I can never get exactly what I want. But the image we're trying to conjure up here is a lamb. Like, again, Jesus is the Lamb of God. So now, again, it's a false prophet. This is all trying to imitate Jesus. It's trying to be God. So the lamb looks innocent. It has like these little, nubs up here. It doesn't really have horns, because horns are a sign of authority in the Bible. So it doesn't, it's looking all innocent. And and also you could think of a wolf in sheep's clothing. But then when it speaks like a dragon. It speaks like Satan. So this is Satan in the background lurking, because he's really the power behind. Whoops. Okay. All right. So let's look at Matthew 7:15, where Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." So, I think it's a general statement, but also is certainly applicable to this final main false prophet that will arise that, looks like a sheep. He's coming looking like a sheep, an innocent lamb, but the reality is that's not what he is. So let's see here. All right. So he spoke like a dragon. All right. So he causes all the earth to worship the Antichrist. And one of the functions of the Holy Spirit is to glorify Jesus. And that's in John 16. So I think that's pretty interesting, because we see that this false prophet, that's kind of like his job, is to like glorify the Antichrist and get people to worship the Antichrist. So let's see. And it says that, he's going to cause the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose mortal wound had been healed. So again, is there like, a wound on the actual Antichrist in addition to just the empire coming back? All right, verse 13. And the second beast performed great signs, even causing fire from heaven to come down to earth in the presence of the people. So because of the signs it was given to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived those who dwell on the earth, which it is interesting. Earth is mentioned quite a bit. So maybe because, that also ties in with he's the beast from the earth, telling them to make an image to the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. So it's interesting. The people living on the earth are told to make this image. So is that where, like, we're calling up the tech guys and tell them to make up some sort of AI robot or, whatever. We'll talk about that more in a second. But make an image to the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. So now they're giving a specific way that the Antichrist had been wounded. And so it's possible the Antichrist is attacked and whatever injury he gets, it's like, this should be fatal. He's not going to survive this, but, through demonic, powers, he's able to then the wound is healed and he recovers. So again, all these lying signs and wonders are going to be deceiving the inhabitants of the earth. And let's look at a couple other verses that talk about this. So, okay, so just as far as the fire coming from the earth, we did see, like, the two witnesses were able to have fire come out of their mouth if anybody tried to harm them, the fire could come out of their mouths and destroy the enemies. We also see Elijah was able to call fire from heaven. That was 1 Kings 18 and also 2 Kings 1, 10 through 12. Just for the sake of time, we're not going to look at those, but you can look them up later if you want. All right, now then we see false signs. Jesus warned about this in Matthew 24:24. So he says, "At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders that would deceive even the elect, if that were possible." So you've got to be aware of the level of deception that is going to be exercised upon the world at this point. It's like, unless you know Jesus Christ, like, those who know their God will firmly resist him. It's going to be like very, pretty much impossible for anybody to not get sucked into this, because they're going to be so overwhelmed by these false signs and wonders. So Jesus has told us in advance. Now, go back. Okay. I wanted to look at 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 12. It's nice when you have these cross references here. It gives you similar verses. And of course, Revelation 13 is there. But Second Thessalonians says the coming of the lawless one. So that's the name for the Antichrist, is the lawless one, son of destruction or son of perdition. That's used in, Paul uses that term in Thessalonians, but this is the Antichrist. The coming of the lawless one will be accompanied by the working of Satan. Okay, that's exactly what Revelation 13 has just told us. Satan is giving his power, his throne, and great authority to the Antichrist. So accompanied by the working of Satan with every kind of power, sign, and false wonder, and with every wicked deception directed against those who are perishing, because they refused the love of the truth that would have saved them. For this reason, God will send them a powerful delusion so they will believe the lie. All right, so I did want to mention just, in terms of Jesus, Matthew 24, talking about these false Christs. I mean, we've had false Christs for centuries appearing, and false prophets, and we still have a lot of Christian false prophets that are operating currently in American Christianity. But as far as false Christ-like, I don't know if you guys have seen all the some recent news, but there's this one guy, Abdullah Hashim, who has arisen, who's claiming to be the Mahdi and like the successor to Jesus Christ. And I think it was the Pope as well, like he's claiming all this stuff. And he's quoting the Bible and using a lot of Christian terminology. But, for the end times eschatology for Islam is very interesting. And I've done some videos on that. I think like the Islamic Antichrist might have been the one where I went into that in detail. But it's an inversion. It's like their Mahdi, who was supposed to come on the scene that they're waiting for. It's like their Messiah. He fits the description of the Antichrist in Christianity. They even have that he's riding in on a white horse, which is like, well, that's Revelation 6:1 and 2, the first seal with the Antichrist. So it's very interesting. It's like the correlations are actually mind blowing, but they have, they have they have their own, false trinity of the Mahdi. The Dajjal, I think, is their Antichrist, which is the true Jesus Christ. And then they have, their version of the false prophet. And now that kind of escapes my memory exactly on the details for that. But yeah, so there's these, people out there claiming, and the amazing thing is they're like, have, people following them, giving them all kinds of money. And these are big money making operations. And all these people giving these testimonies about, resurrections from the dead and all these miracles and healings that have occurred. So, again, you can't go by, wow, look what this person can do. They must be God. It's like, no, they can be possessed by Satan. So, be getting their power from satanic sources. So just because it works doesn't mean it's right. Everything has to be tested with the word of God. All right, so let me see where it is. So the second, I think we're down in verse 15. The second beast was permitted to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship it to be killed. So, so again, no one's really going to know how this will play out specifically until it happens. But we do see that, there's this image of the beast that can speak. So is that, we see that there's the abomination that causes desolation, which is set up in the temple. And let me see where that is. Daniel 7. Okay. And so this is the prophecy I've been talking about, but the final verse here in chapter 9 of Daniel, and he meaning the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. So invades the temple and stops that. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon him, upon the Antichrist, which will be the lake of fire at the end of the tribulation. But the abomination that causes desolation. Okay, again, 2 Thessalonians 2:4 talks about the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction. Verse 4, he will oppose and exalt himself above every so-called God or object of worship. So he will seat himself in the temple of God, proclaiming to be God. So, that's what he's going to do. So is that the image something separate from him walking in and doing that? So do they create an image of the Antichrist and then it can speak? And how could that work? So, we do have with massive amounts of technology and that just keeps exploding exponentially with all this AI and everything else. Although, like I said, so far I've been that impressed with AI. But, could it be some sort of a statue or a hologram or a robot or a clone of the Antichrist that is able to, powered through AI, perhaps, that it could speak. And we already have all these deep fakes where you can have, anybody's image making them say anything you want them to say that looks pretty realistic. And the technology keeps improving. There's a few things so far where they have trouble getting the hands right and different things, but it's probably only a matter of time until that technology is perfected. So all this technology could tie in. So again, it's not really 100% clear how this will happen, but certainly within realms of possibility right now for the technology to do something like this. All right. So, again, if you refuse to worship the image, then you're killed. So now let's get to the mark of the beast. Finish this chapter out. So verse 16, and the second beast required all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. Here is a call for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and that number is 666. All right, so notice that the mark of the beast is needed to buy or sell. And it's also attached to the Antichrist and, his name and the number of his name. So this isn't something that you're going to get by accident. And by definition, we can rule out a lot of things already that have been thought over the years, some of them actually fairly ridiculous. So some possible theories over the decades have been, when the Social Security numbers came out in, I think, like 1930s or something, that maybe that would be tied to the mark of the beast. Then we had barcodes, then microchips, vaccines, and that was a big thing during the C-19 pandemic with, the jab is the mark of the beast. It's like, well, no, it's not. I mean, the Antichrist has not been revealed. He's not here in power. This is not the midpoint of the tribulation where he's invading a rebuilt Jewish temple, which still is, today is not even rebuilt, and desecrating it, and then this image being set up. So again, as Christians, we need to understand what the Bible is teaching so we're not falling into crazy conspiracy theories. UPC codes was another thing. And one that I thought was really insane was Gorbachev's birthmark. So if you're older, you may remember Gorbachev was was the president of the Soviet Union at one point. I can't remember what his title was, what they called him, but that probably president. But at any event, he had like this kind of weird reddish, purplish, big birthmark up on he was kind of bald. And, there was this mark up there. It's like, well, why would that be the mark of the beast? It's just biblically, these things are not correct. And honestly, I feel like it just makes us look stupid when we as Christians are biblically ignorant and we're pushing stuff like this that is clearly not what the Bible is saying. So, all right. So moving on. So how are things lining up for a mark? This mark that's needed on your right hand or your forehead. Actually, I forgot. I wanted to mention just that I wanted to contrast. This is the Antichrist mark. Okay, so he's giving a mark on the right hand or the forehead. And God actually has his own mark, which we saw in Revelation 7 with the 144,000 who are sealed by God. And then we see them show up again in Revelation 14, which will be cover chapter we start with next week. But in 14, the 144,000 are seen with Jesus Christ. They're seen with the Lamb, and who had his name, the Lamb, and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And they're in heaven at this point. That says they've been redeemed from the earth. So it seems by the midpoint, I don't know if they're taken off the earth at that point, or were they all killed at this point? Either way, they have Jesus and God's name on their foreheads. And then we see also in Revelation 22:4, which is the very last chapter of Revelation and of the Bible, and it's talking about the new heavens and the new earth. And it says in verse 4 there, they will see his face and his name will be on their foreheads. So these are all those who are now in the new heavens and new earth. They have God's name. So there's a couple other references just in Exodus. I think the high priest had like a thing kept on his forehead that was like God's law. I should look up that reference, but Exodus 13:9 and Deuteronomy 6:8 also were talking about the Israelites needed to have, something on their right hand or tied to your right hand or your forehead to remember God's laws, basically, as a remembrance. And Ezekiel 9:4, we will look up that one really fast. Ezekiel is one of the Jews taken into exile into Babylon from Jerusalem. If I recall, he was in Jerusalem, but he was in Judea. And so he's having all these different visions and dreams, and God speaking to him and giving him prophecies and so forth. So this is one where he's seeing the glory of the God of Israel rose from above the cherubim where it had been. Okay, so then there's a man, which is an angel, who's told, go throughout the city of Jerusalem, said the Lord, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men sighing and groaning over all the abominations committed there. And as I listened, he said to the others, follow him through the city and start killing. Do not show pity or spare anyone. So the idolatry of the Jews had reached such a horrendous level, and the temple had Ezekiel's shown like this gross idolatry that's occurring in God's temple. And the presence of the Lord leaves the temple, and then, the temple ends up being destroyed by the Babylonians, who, Israel's like a vassal state at this point, but they kept rebelling. So finally King Nebuchadnezzar just comes in and it's like, basically, destroys Jerusalem and the temple, and the rest of the people that were still there are now taken into captivity. So, but the point here is that the people that were upset about all of this gross idolatry and sin that was occurring in the temple and Jerusalem, they are protected from this judgment. A mark is put on their heads. And so I think it's interesting. So again, this is like an inversion. The Antichrist mark is identifying you with the Antichrist, and you will be protected for that 3.5 years where you can buy and sell and so forth. At least you're protected in that way. I mean, the first bowl of wrath that pours out, it says it causes those who have the mark of the beast to, sores break out all over their body. Or you're possibly, I guess, when I studied this before, some of the translations indicate it might just be at the location of the mark. So it's hard to say if it's going to be all over or just where the mark is. You have a non-healing sore. So, I mean, and then all these judgments are pouring out for the bowl judgments. So it's not like I'm saying you're protected, from God's wrath, but you're protected from the Antichrist wrath, I guess. So, but let's talk about, again, just how some of these, how technology is lining up for all this, which, there's these biometric payment technologies that are popular, and Amazon One has a palm scan. So you can just use your palm and pay. And there's also face scans are being used. And some of these are like, China and Russia, other parts of the world are already utilizing these technologies, and even eye scans. So you can just have your eye scanned and you can pay. Of course, then we have the whole medical, financial microchips. We microchip our dogs, and people are getting microchips themselves. And in fact, there is, I think it's called a microchip, but it looks like a grain of rice, but they can insert it. I think they said it's inserted like in this area of your hand between your thumb and index finger. But either way, it's like this tiny thing is inserted, and you don't need car keys, you can pay with it, So there's a lot of convenience associated with that. So you can see the appeal where people would be like, well, yeah, let's do that. But anyways, and then the whole Neuralink thing, and I did a video on that one. It was probably at least a year ago, where Neuralink was kind of in the news, and it's like, oh, this is the mark of the beast. Again, my video was like, no, it's not the mark of the beast, because the beast is not here. And it's actually not even on your forehead. It's in your head, in your brain somewhere. So there's that. But, could that technology ultimately be used? It's certainly, it's certainly within the bounds of possibility, but it's not. If you go and have Neuralink put in your head, which personally I would never do, just from the point of what happens if that gets hacked, that just seems, a very scary idea. But, but getting it doesn't mean it's the mark of the beast. And maybe if I was like a quadriplegic or something, maybe I'd be like, well, it's worth the risk, but it's not the mark. It's not tied to the Antichrist. The Antichrist is not here. And then, digital tattoos. So there are like just tattoos that you can get put on that are like a digital thing, again, for paying and carrying all this information about yourself and whatnot. And then, like central bank digital currency. So, and that to me is, it's like, you can see the allure of that as well. A lot of people already are pretty much on a cashless basis because they're using their debit cards or credit cards and checks or whatever. But once you allow that system to come in where cash is eliminated and everything is digital, you have just set yourself up for massive loss of freedom and tyranny, because now everything you do is tracked. And it's like, oh, well, you wanted to stock up on some things. Well, that's not allowed. You can't do that. You went and supported some protest that we don't like. Truckers in Canada, we're shutting down your bank account. You can't access your money. So these things already are happening. And so it's a grim warning of what will happen if CBDCs are instituted. So, all right. So now, since I've been talking about like this whole Islamic thing, how might that tie in with the mark of the beast? And so this is an article, it's called The Mark of the Beast and Islam from Big Faith Ministries. So the link will be in the description box. But he talks about these Islamic jihadists and devotees of Islam often wear headbands on their foreheads and patches on their right arms with a mark of submission, which is the Bismillah, the Islamic creed of in the name of Allah. Well, that's interesting. The name of the beast, or the number of his name, followed by 2 crossed swords etched or inscribed on the material. The Chi Xi stigma, which is the 666 in the manuscript, has been an enigma or puzzle to the church, and some have reckoned it as a symbol rather than a number. This mark, the Chi Xi stigma, has an uncanny resemblance to the Bismillah, combined with the universal Islamic symbol of crossed swords. So you can see in this box down here, that's what it looks like in the manuscript. And this was Walid Shubat, who was looking at these manuscripts. And I think this was like located, some museum or wherever. I can't remember now where it was, but he looked at them, and actually you can access them online at this point. So anyways, he was looking at the original manuscripts, and that's where it's the 666, and those are the symbols. So he's saying, down in this bottom box, that this looks very similar to the Arabic. So I don't know. It's an interesting theory, but it certainly does. It could tie in with some sort of end times thing where the mark actually has to do with, in other words, because Islam is a totalitarian sort of political struggle. Well, it's, it covers everything. It's a complete control of every aspect of your life. So it's like, okay, you submit to Allah or you die, and you got to have his identification on your forehead or arm, and and that's needed to buy or sell. So that could be a possibility as well. So, all right, so let's talk about just some reasons for the mark. I think I'm done with all my different web pages. But again, it's Satan's, counterfeiting God's sealing of the 144,000. God has sealed his people, and even like as the church, we're sealed with the Holy Spirit. So now he's trying to have a mark to identify his followers and give them gifts and favors, also track and control commerce, force people to stop worshiping God and worship Satan. And it permanently ties you to the kingdom of Satan. Oh, wait, I forgot there was one last passage I wanted to look at, which is, why you do not want to take the mark of the beast. Let's see, it's Revelation 14. So Revelation 14, we have these three angels who go throughout the earth and give a message. So I think this is, in my opinion, the three angels are going through at the midpoint because they're giving a warning. So the third angel followed, calling out in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on his forehead or on his hand, he too will drink the wine of God's anger poured undiluted into the cup of his wrath. And he will be tormented in fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. Day and night there is no rest for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name." So that is a very horrific outcome and fate. It's like, okay, you're going to get killed if you don't take it. But, ultimately, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you spend eternity with him. And, this life is kind of just a blip on the screen. I mean, it's all ending anyways. 3.5 years, it's all going to be over when Jesus comes back and sets up his millennial kingdom. Whereas if you take the mark, well, I've got to eat, I got to feed my family, or, whatever. It's eternal fire, and it's eternal damnation in the lake of fire. So that's a very sobering thought. Now, just as far as calculating the number of the beast, and for it's the number of a man, and that number is 666. So again, the 666 is a kind of 6 is kind of considered man's number because he was created on the sixth day, and is this kind of maybe the 666. Almost the false trinity, perhaps. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but there is a thing called to calculate, numbers of names. It's a process called gematria, which is applying numerical values of letters to a word to find meaning. And different languages have different number values. So there is a number value for Greek and Arabic and different things. So, they have you can just, if you put in the search like gematria calculator, you can pull that up and then you can put stuff in. But I kind of wonder, it's like, okay, well, if the person's name is like, they're not English, which a lot of these people I want to look at are not. So do you need to have what is like their number in their language and then figure out like, okay, well then what number system is used to calculate? So I'm kind of stuck on that. And there are, gematria is associated with occult practices. So, like when I first heard this before, that it was an occult practice, I was like, oh no, not trying to practice anything occult. But it does say in Revelation 13 that, if you have, wisdom, let the one who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for the number of a man, and that number is 666. So it doesn't seem like trying to figure that out is necessary. I guess it's telling us to do that. But I did put into I like to ask AI these different questions. So I asked the brave AI, what is the name of Allah in Arabic? And then what's its numerical value or whatever. So this was the response, which was very interesting. Allah, this is the Arabic word for God. It is used by Muslims, but it's also used by Arabic-speaking Christians and Jews to refer to the one God. which to me, that was kind of like a subtle insinuation that Islam, Christians, and Jews are all worshiping the same God. And that lie is, I mean, I've heard Jewish people promoting that belief, and even Christians are promoting that belief that, oh, it's like, we're not worshiping the same God. The Allah described in the Quran bears no resemblance to the true God of the Bible. So, this is a false God, and we're not worshiping the same God. But this plays in very well. If you can convince people, especially for the Muslims at the end, if you can convince people, oh yeah, we're all worshiping the same God. Oh, it's okay. We actually have the additional information, they're going to, according to their eschatology, there's going to be all these archaeological finds and different things that are going to confirm the truth of Islam, and that, our stuff is corrupted or whatever. So again, massive end times deception, but those who know their God will firmly resist him. All right, so the numerical value of Allah. It says in Arabic, each letter has a numerical value, a system known as abjad or alphabetical numerology. The numerical value of the word Allah can be calculated as follows. Then it gives you the letters and the numbers. Adding these values together, the numerical value of Allah in Arabic is 66. So it wasn't quite 666, but I did think that was kind of interesting. So, all right. So just to wrap this up, as we've seen today, the Antichrist will be assisted by the false prophet, who will be a wolf or dragon in sheep's clothing. He will perform many false signs and miracles, and will cause all who dwell on the earth to worship the Antichrist or face death. He requires the number of the beast, 666, to be on your right hand or forehead, which is needed to buy or sell, but taking the mark will result in an eternity in the lake of fire, so don't do it. So today is the day of salvation. If you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, just turn to him in faith and pray. Believe in him as God the Son, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So if you have questions on how to become a Christian, and, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to do what I can to help you. But next time we will be talking about Revelation chapter 14, which is the Lamb and the 144,000, the three angels with the messages for the earth, and then the harvest of the earth, which, knowing myself, this is probably going to end up being 2 lessons. There's always there's just so much amazing depth and detail when you're studying the Bible. So it takes a while to really dig into all that. So, all right. Well, I hope you all have a blessed week, and we will see you next one, God willing. Bye.